King Meng Huo and the Nanman tribes have arrived in Total War 3 Kingdoms. This brings an entirely new roster of units to the game, which we are going to look at in this video. As there are a hell of a lot of new units though, I'm going to be quite brief on most of them, elaborating on some of the more exciting units. So let us see what the king has brought for us. We'll begin with King Meng Huo himself. With all of these Nanman generals, they are their own thing as Nanman. They're not Vanguard, Champion or Commander. They're basically just all really furious. Meng Huo is a melee beast, great stats all across the board. No shield though, so a little bit vulnerable there. He is unbreakable as well, so he's not going to rout and run away. For other abilities, he's got Crippling Blow, which will reduce enemy melee evasion and armor by 50%, potentially allowing him to do more damage. Defiant Cry, which reduces morale by 15. The Power of Love, which is activated if he fights alongside Zhu Rong, which will give him damage resistance and an immunity to fatigue. And also Bold Command, which will increase friendly morale by 15. Or you could just go ahead and whack him on an elephant mount, which, well, you can imagine what's going to happen there. Charging around, trampling everybody, the elephant also adds a bunch of abilities that can be used, so Meng Huo overall just a melee beast that is going to cause anybody some problems. And then we have his Lady Zhu Rong. She is also very much a beast in the melee. Not quite as strong as Meng Huo, she doesn't have quite as high damage, but still plenty to put out. For her more unique ability, she has Flying Daggers, which will do damage over time to a targeted enemy, Rending Strike, which will reduce armor and do some damage, and she also has Defiant Cry and Power of Love like her man. She's also unbreakable, so very similar to Meng Huo overall, both very powerful in those melee fights. And she, like all of these new heroes, can have an elephant mount. Now we have King Mulu, who again, melee beast pretty much. These unit cards are maybe a little bit deceptive as they are based on custom battles and the upgraded versions of these generals, so don't expect them to be quite this strong at the start of your campaigns. The melee evasion is actually a lot lower on all of these generals. It says 58% on King Mulu here, but he actually starts off at about 10%, as do most of them, so they're not great at avoiding damage overall, which just means they need to be a little bit careful around better units sometimes. For King Mulu's unique abilities, he has Expose, which will increase his melee evasion but reduce his ranged block chance. He also has Crippling Blow like Meng Huo, which will reduce enemy melee evasion and armor by 50%, and Fury, which will increase his speed and morale. That is King Mulu. And now to King Duosur. He's fairly decent in the melee, but he comes with a ranged attack, unlike all these previous generals, so he can use his bow from a distance. Obviously. Not going to use it in melee, is he, Captain Obvious? Now, while he isn't unbreakable like all these previous generals, he does have Guerrilla Deployment, which is always a nice cheeky trait to have. For other abilities, he's got Subdue, which will increase an enemy's cooldown time on their abilities. Nature's Protection, which increases ranged block chance, melee evasion and morale for himself. And Endless Volley, which will increase his attack rates and his morale. On to King Shamoka, who is pretty beefy in the melee and with a whole lot of armor piercing damage, more so than other generals, and also a ranged attack as well, although it is a bit shorter in the range. Either way, it makes him a nice versatile general. You've got the closer ranged attack, you've got the armor piercing for melee, could make him better against elite units. He is unbreakable as well, and again can have that elephant mount. For his abilities, he's got Blow for Blow, which will consume 10% of his health, but in return for a big old splash attack that'll do lots of damage. He also has Southern Wrath, which will reduce enemy morale and do a splash attack, and then Swift Steps, which will increase his speed and give him some fatigue back. So King Shamoka, melee beast, but with a few nice extra options. And our last general of the day, King Utugu, who might just be the Lu Bu of the Nanman. He's got some big weapon damage, especially in the armor piercing. He's got decent armor and decent melee evasion, more so than all the previous generals, so he can put out the hurt and survive pretty well. He also has Charge Negation, which is another key to survival, and is immune to terror. For his activatable abilities, he has Off Guard, which will reduce enemy speed by 15% and do some splash damage. He also has Desperate Rage, which will increase his melee damage and armor piercing damage by 15% and his morale by 15 when he drops below 50% health. And Fury, increasing his speed and morale, like that other general. So possibly the Lu Bu of the Nanman, great for taking on other characters with that high armor piercing damage. All around though, guess what? Melee beast. Now to our melee infantry, beginning with Ravine Warriors. Very much your cheap and not very cheerful infantry, expendable, not really great at anything unless maybe you bring them in great numbers, they can overwhelm the enemy. And then a step up from them is the Nanman Warriors. These are a little bit more useful than the previous unit. They've got a shield, they've got some armor, so they'll be able to get some cheap light work done, but don't expect anything too special. They have 100% fire resistance like a lot of these Nanman units, but apparently are prone to falling asleep. Goddamn narcoleptic Nanman, apparently. Not a trait you look for in a warrior, if we're being honest. Now to the Valley Tribesmen, who are listed as a medium axe infantry, but they in fact have a sword, so ignore that, just a typo. This is all pre-release, remember. This unit is a little bit more viable on the front line as they have fairly decent stats. They got a shield to protect themselves, they got some melee evasion, they got some armor on, so they should have a bit of staying power, but not a great deal of damage output, not a lot of armor piercing damage, so good front line, but they're going to need some support to win up there, probably. And to a very similar unit in the Wu Ling Fighters, who are very much the same as that previous unit to be honest, except they have one speciality: fighting against heroes. Their ability, Tribal Pride, will increase their melee base damage and melee armor piercing damage by 300% when they're fighting a hero. So these boys, as you can see on their unit card, are the Slayer of Heroes, potentially. Now we have Axe Throwers, who, as you might expect, are more of a ranged unit than anything else. They can do okay in melee, nothing too special there, but their armor-piercing axes that they throw are where they shine. So could be really good on the flank if you get behind enemy units, start throwing those armor-piercing axes in their back. That could be pretty dangerous. Of course, good for whittling down those heavily armored units. Now, if you're looking for the tankiest infantry of the bunch, you'll probably want the Nanzhong Champions. Still kind of similar to some of the previous infantries, just better at the job, a bit tougher, more armor, better melee evasion, got the shield, so they should be a nice choice for the front line if you're looking for the unit that can hold that front line as long as possible. Now we have the Wugua Axe Throwers. These honestly very much the same as the other Axe Throwers, except they don't have a shield and they're a little bit better in melee, so more of an offensive unit potentially. They can throw those axes and then charge into the enemy rather than being better for flanking, although they could definitely do that too, although their lack of shield does make them particularly vulnerable to being blasted to pieces. Now to something a little more unique, the Followers of the Flame. Their stats aren't anything to write home about, but as you can see, they have massive flaming weapons, which will cause burning damage over time on enemy units that they attack. So good potential damage over time if you can keep them alive long enough. May want to support them by having another unit mixed in with them, but good potential damage to all kinds of units, especially any that may be weak to fire. And to something even more unique, Tiger Warriors. That's right, you get some freaking tigers. These are much an animal pack like in previous Total Wars, like War Dogs. You will pick a target unit for them to charge at, they will go and munch them down, and then they'll just kind of go and do whatever they want, and they won't be controllable anymore. Except for the men in the unit, you'll still be able to go and do something with them, who will have some melee power themselves. The tigers will cause scare as well, and are unbreakable. So a nice unit for munching down light troops, especially those dirty archers. And lastly, for the melee infantry, Might of the Valley. These big boys bring the armor-piercing damage with massive two-handed axes. They're a little bit lacking in the defenses for it, so they're very much your damage dealer unit. If you're looking for a hard-hitting front line, you'll probably want these boys on there. And they have a Berserk ability, increasing their damage, armor-piercing damage, and melee attack rate when they drop below 50% health. Now to your various spear units. First off, the Nanman Spearmen. Quite simply, nothing special, typical cheap spear unit, got that charge reflection, good for defending the flanks early, but ultimately you'll be looking for an upgrade. To something a little more jazzy with the Wolfpack. These are a spear unit that also have a fairly decent armor-piercing ranged weapon. They have charge reflection, so still an anti-large unit primarily, but they have a lot of tricks up their sleeve. They cause scare, which will reduce enemy morale, guerrilla deployment, so you can try some sneaky tricks with them, ignore ground type, so they won't be hindered by any kind of terrain, and a passive buff, Pack Hunters, which will increase their melee charge bonus by 100%, their speed by 50%, and their charge speed by 50%, and they'll cause terror. So a sneaky and versatile anti-cav unit. Now we have the Sanjiang Poison Spears. These aren't great in the stats, but they still are an anti-large unit with the charge reflection, but they have poison weapons, which means they'll do damage over time to anyone they attack. And that poison damage ignores armor, so great against those heavier units because their armor will mean nothing when fighting these spears. Nanzhong Spearmen, a basic spearman unit but better at the job than some of the other more basic units. All about that charge reflection of course, and they can at least adopt some more advanced formations. On to Javelin Spearmen, who are a nice multi-role unit. They can play the role of a normal spear unit with their charge reflection, but as those units are running away or running towards them, they can launch some javelin spears into their faces. So some nice potential to put big hurt on the enemy units, especially as those javelins are armor piercing. They could also just flank around on infantry and start throwing those javelins in the back of enemy infantry. Again, if they're heavily armored, those armor piercing javelins will work a treat. A nice melee or missile spearman. If you want the previous unit but just a little bit tougher though, Javelin Spear Guard are the answer. They've got a big old shield and they're actually pretty good in melee, still got those armor piercing javelins, so this unit could be very powerful in many places. Frontline, flanks, getting cav, getting infantry. They've got a whole bunch of formations, so a really nice versatile unit at the more elite end of the Nanman Spearmen. And to our final spearman, Shields of the South. Kinda similar to the previous unit, just without the ranged attack. A nice tough tanky unit, good for defending the flanks or up on the front line. They also encourage their allies, as do the previous unit I should mention, which will give a morale boost to nearby friendly units. A strong choice if you want a tanky frontline unit and you're expecting maybe a lot of cav to charge at that front line, or elephants or anything else. A good strong elite option. The first of our ranged units, Nanman Slingers. Not very good in the melee as you might expect. Got some okay range, nice non-armor piercing slinger damage. Good for whittling down those lightly armored enemy troops. Now to Wu Ling Slingers. Very similar to the previous unit, just slightly better in the melee, so they could actually do something in the melee. Pretty much the same sling damage, but they can cross all terrain, which means they won't be slowed down by any kind of terrain, so a nice maneuverable unit, but otherwise, typical slinger unit. Fire Archers, a fairly self-explanatory unit and the only archer unit for the Nanman. So the longest range for them, of course, rubbish in the melee, so good missile damage, fire damage on all of those arrows, so good for lighting things up or for lighting up anything that's weak to fire, otherwise a typical archer unit. Javelin Throwers, again another self-explanatory unit. They've got those armor-piercing javelins with short range that they can launch at enemies, good against their heavy armor. They're not too bad in melee, similar to some of the cheaper melee infantry, so not a bad little versatile unit, good for flanking around, getting those javelins in the back probably. Also a strong choice for taking down enemy large units, in particular, goddamn elephants. To something a little more sneaky in the Sanjiang Poison Darts. Useless in the melee and very low damage on the missile itself, but of course the poison will do damage over time, which will rack up against whatever they fire at, regardless of armor. Short range though, but they do have stalk, so they can sneak up on enemies and hit them before they even know they're there. A unit that should probably have guerrilla deployment, but you may be able to get it through a hero to pull off some nice sneaky traps. And now we've got Tiger Slingers. That's right, these guys will throw their tigers at the enemy, which will obviously result in absolute carnage. Although maybe I'm misremembering how they work, I don't know. Maybe they're just slingers with tigers, whatever. I know which I would prefer. Kinda similar to the Tiger Warriors, they've just got a ranged attack instead of being a melee unit once the tigers have been let loose to do their thing. A fun unit either way. Although definitely more fun if they actually threw their tigers into crowds of enemies. And lastly, in the ranged department, Hidden Vipers. Very much the same as the poison darts we saw just now, except these ones are actually pretty damn good in melee. They've got a shield, they've got some armor on, and they have a mixed missile formation. So some of them will stand out front to protect the ones that are firing behind. So you get a nice combination of their poison darts, while some of them are attacking in melee. And they have that stalk as well, so they can still pull off the sneaky traps, but they can hold their own if they should come into a melee fight. And to finish off a pretty sweet roster, of course, it's the elephants. Beginning with the cheapest of the bunch, Southern Elephants, who are fairly, well, you know, they're elephants. They charge around, they stamp on people, they do lots of damage. However, they do lack any protection from missiles. So you'll need to make sure you control the enemy missiles somewhat before you charge these in, otherwise you may lose them pretty quick. If you do manage to keep them alive though, they will do absolutely tons of damage and rout away loads of units. They've got a massive charge bonus, so you want to keep charging them around. Don't leave them in combat with any one unit for too long. They don't have a lot of melee evasion either because, you know, they're elephants. They do have a ranged attack though. A couple of fellas up there throwing stuff around, so you've got a bit of extra damage from that. But yeah, southern elephants, even though they're the cheapest ones, still incredibly powerful. If you are looking for an elephant upgrade though, then you'll get yourself some war elephants. Very much the same deal. Massive charge bonus now though, 460, that's quite a big jump from the previous unit. Still got that ranged attack as well, but also still lacking in armor and protection. This one also has mighty knockback, so they'll be knocking around people all over the place, more so than the previous elephants. If you're looking for more of a supportive kind of elephant, then the Nanzhong elephants might be for you. They're not so good and powerful in the melee, they've got a bit of a smaller charge bonus, but still going to do lots of damage either way. No ranged attack now though, but making up for that is some big old drums on the back, which sound kind of useless, but they're actually freaking awesome. The rapid cadence will give you plus 15 speed and an immunity to fatigue to all nearby units. The aggressive cadence will increase range damage and melee damage of all kinds by 15% to all nearby units. Or you could have the cautious cadence, which will increase morale by 15 and melee evasion by 15% to nearby friendly units. So you choose between one of those three cadences to help your army in whatever situation they may be useful. So you've got a cadence for hastily moving up on the enemy, one for aggressive and attacking on the enemy, and one for more defensive and protecting of your army. You use whichever one is going to be useful at the time. A really nice supportive unit. But still, elephants. So there we go, all the new units in the Furious Wild DLC. Meng Huo and all his Nanman boys have arrived to the scene, and they are certainly bringing a few things a little bit different. I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for watching, I will see you in the future.